Alarms screamed across every station in Earth's orbital defense network. Admiral Grace Holland stood at the command center of the Sentinel platform, watching her screens fill with red dots. They'd come. Everyone had hoped the rumors were wrong, that the Dominion would pass Earth by and continue their conquest elsewhere. But hope meant nothing against the 500 warships now emerging from hyperspace. Said 46 ships, 47 modern vessels with the best technology humanity could build. She had trained her entire life for a moment like this, but nothing could prepare anyone for odds this terrible. The ships were massive, covered in weapons that glowed with energy her sensors could barely read. They moved in perfect formation like predators surrounding wounded prey. The mission cut through the chaos. The face of a commander appeared on screen. His gray skin was stretched tight over a skull that seemed too angular to be natural. His eyes were black pools that reflected no light. When he spoke, his voice carried the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. "I'm of the Dominion. Your world now belongs to us. Your ships are insects before our fleet. Surrender and some of you will be permitted to serve. Resist and watch everything you love burn." Did not respond. She simply ordered her fleet to engage. What followed was a slaughter dressed as a battle. The weapons cut through human shields like they did not exist. Their targeting system predicted every maneuver before it happened. In 20 minutes, Grace lost 18 ships. The rest were falling back in desperate retreat, buying time that would run out soon. The destruction with what might have been boredom. His sensors swept across Earth's orbit, cataloging everything. Defense platform, communicating satellites, civilian station. Then something caught his attention. A large structure floated in a stable orbit, different from the military installation. It was old. The design spoke of an earlier age of human construction. His tactical officer identified it as a museum. "What of this?" asked, genuinely curious. "Museum, Commander. They keep old warships there, decommissioned vessels from their previous conflicts. The human preserve them for historical purposes." The sound was cold and sharp like breaking glass. He opened a wide broadcast so every human could hear him. "What your species holds precious. Old broken ships sing in a museum. You are so weak that you cannot even discard your failures. You cling to relics like children holding toys. This is why you deserve to fall. A species that looks backward cannot move forward." Sentinel platform, Grace heard every word. Her hands shook with anger, but anger would not save Earth. She needed something else. She needed a miracle. Her eyes drifted to the museum on her tactical display. 12 ships were preserved there, 12 warships from different eras of human history. They were supposed to be monuments, reminders of wars fought and won. But she knew something that did not. The ships were kept functional, not combat ready but functional. Museum ran demonstration cruises twice a year, firing old weapons to target drones for crowds of spectators. It was insane. It was desperate. It might be the only chance they had. So opened a private channel to the museum station. A man answered almost immediately. He was in his 50s with gray hair and calm eyes that seemed strange in the middle of an invasion. His name was Deng Marsh, and he had been the curator of the Orbital Naval Museum for 15 years. "Marsh, this is Admiral Holland. I need to ask you something that I have no right to ask." Looked at her through the screen. Behind him, she could see museum staff running in panic. Alarms were blaring there too. Everyone knew what was happening. "I know what you want, Admiral. You want me to wake them up." Grace paused. She had expected to explain, to convince, to beg, but Deng Marsh understood already. "You do it. Can you actually get them ready to fight?" Turned and looked at something off screen. Grace imagined him staring at those old ships through the staging window. The USS Valor, a destroyer from the First Colonial War. The battleship so old that some of her systems still use physical switches instead of ships built in eras when humanity expected every war to be their last. "We're built to fight, Admiral. That is what they do. Give me 1 hour." "You have 30 minutes. That is all the time we have left." Nodded and cut the channel. Grace watched the museum station on her display, howling she had not just sent good people to die for nothing. Inside the museum, Dan Mark moved faster than he had in years. He grabbed his chief engineer and pulled her toward the main docking bay. "You're taking the ships out, all of them, every ship that can fly." At him like he had lost his mind. "Denny, those ships are antiques. Some of them are older than my grandmother. They still work, you keep them working. That is your job. Now the job matters more than it ever has." To argue, but she saw something in Danny's eyes, a fire that had been sleeping for a long time. She nodded and started running toward the engine bays. Entered the main hall where visitors normally walked among the exhibits. Today there were no tourists, but there were people. Museum staff, maintenance workers, and a group of retired veterans who had come for a reunion event. Old men and women who had served on these very ships decades ago. One of them stepped forward. Pete was 73 years old and walked with a slight limp from an injury he got in a war most people had forgotten. But his eyes were sharp and his hands were steady. "Heard the broadcast," Pete said. "That alien thinks our ships are jokes. I served on the Valor for 6 years. She's no joke." Put his hand on Pete's shoulder. "Can you still man a gunnery station?" Smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting a long time for someone to ask that question. "And I was born at a gunnery station. Point me at the enemy." Looked at the other veterans, at his staff, at everyone in that hall. They were scared. They were not soldiers, but they were human, and humans had a long history of doing impossible things when everything was on the line. "I think we are weak because we keep our old ships. They do not understand what those ships mean to us. Every one of them was built by people who refused to give up. Every one of them carries the spirit of everyone who ever served aboard. Today, we are going to show them what happens when you mock human history." And toward the docking bays where 12 ships waited in silence. Their hulls were from old battles. Their weapons were primitive by modern standards, but they were still there, still ready, still waiting. It was time to wake the giants. The docking bay of the Orbital Naval Museum was never meant to launch a fleet. It was designed for slow, careful movements. Ships would glide out one at a time for demonstration flights, then return to their berths like old horses returning to stable. But today, there was no time for slow or careful. Today, the bay erupted with activity that bordered on chaos. From ship to ship with a toolkit that weighed almost as much as she did. Her hands moved automatically, connecting power feeds and chain reactor seals. She had maintained these vessels for 8 years, treating them like precious museum pieces that needed gentle care. Now she was kicking them awake like a mother dragging children out of bed for school. "Valor is online," she shouted into her communicator. "Reactor stable at 60%. That is as good as it gets without a full warm cycle." Marsh stood in the central control room, watching status lights change from red to yellow to green across his board. 12 ships. He needed 12 ships ready to fly in less than 30 minutes. 5 were already showing green. The others were fighting him. Park, a young technician who had only worked at the museum for 2 years, ran up to him with a tablet clutched to her chest. Marsh, the targeting computers on 3 of the ships are running software that is 40 years out of date. They cannot talk to modern sensor networks. The ships will be flying blind. Took the tablet and stared at the problem. Helen was right. The old ships used targeting systems that were designed for a different era. They could not interface with the current defense grid. They would not know where the enemy was unless someone told them. You build a bridge, something to translate the modern sensor data into a format the old computers can read. His face went pale. That would take days of programming. You have 15 minutes. Opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. She looked at the tablet, then at Danny, then at the chaos around her. Something shifted in her expression. Fear gave way to determination. I will figure it out. Disappeared into the technical bay, and Danny turned his attention to the next crisis. But was not responding to starp command. The old battleship sat in her berth like a sleeping giant who refused to wake. Her react should have been the easiest to activate since it had been fully serviced just 3 months ago. But something was wrong. Ran to the ship himself. It was massive, over 400 meters long. Her hull was thick armor plating from an era when ships were built to take hits instead of avoid them. He climbed through the main airlock and found the problem immediately. Amy stood at the main reactor controls, staring at a panel full of warning lights. Amy was the museum's military historian. She gave tour and lectures about naval tactics. She had never actually served on a warship in her life. Safety locks are engaged, Amy said without looking at him. The computer thinks there is a coolant leak. There is no leak. I have checked 3 times, but I cannot override the safe protocols. He moved to her side and looked at the helm. It was old, but she was not stupid. Her computers were designed to protect the ship from human error. Right now, they were protecting her from a phantom problem that did not exist. Sensor is bad, the coolant sensor. It is reading a leak because the sensor itself is damaged. Can we fix it? At the time, Daniel opened a maintenance panel and found what he was looking for. A bundle of wires connected the sensor to the main computer. He grabbed the wires and pulled them free. The warning lights vanished. The reactor began its start sequence. He stared at him. You just disabled a safety system on a nuclear reactor. Yes, that is incredibly dangerous. Not more dangerous. Can you command this ship? Laughed. It was a short, nervous sound. I'm a historian. I study battles. I do not fight them. Put his hand on her shoulder. You know the ship better than anyone alive. You know her weapons, her strengths, her history. Right now, that makes you the most qualified person we have. That needs a captain. Will you be that captain? He looked around the bridge. Dust covered some of the consoles. The lighting was dim because they had never bothered to replace all the old bulbs. This ship had not fired her weapons in anger for over 8 years. But the weapons were still there. The engines were still there. The heart of the ship was still beating. Yes, Amy said quietly, I will be your captain. Nod and left to check on the other ships. Behind him, Amy began calling for volunteers to crew the. She found them among the retired veterans, the museum staff, and a group of engineering students who had been visiting on a field trip. None of them were soldiers. All of them were willing. In the main bay, Pete climbed aboard the HFY. The ship felt smaller than he remembered. Or maybe he was just bigger now, slower, older. But the gunnery station was exactly where he had left it 30 years ago. The targeting scope still had a scratch on the left side where his wedding ring had scraped it during a battle drill. He sat down in the chair and rested his hands on the controls. They fit perfectly, like they had been waiting for him to come back. Voice crackled over the intercom. All hands, reactors at full power. Weapon systems are online. We are ready to fly. Smiled and whispered to the ship. Did you miss me, old girl? I miss you too. Let us go remind those aliens why they should have stayed home. The control room, Helen Park uploaded her improvised software to the fleet. It was ugly code, held together with shortcuts and prayers. But it worked. The old targeting computers could now see the battlefield through modern sensors. They would know where to shoot. And watched the final set of lights turn green. 12 ships, 12 antiques, 12 pieces of human history that they had laughed at. He opened a channel to the entire fleet. This is Captain Marsh. In a few minutes we are going to undock and fly into a battle we are not supposed to win. Our ships are old. Our crews are not trained for combat. By every measure that matters, we should stay here and wait to die. But we are not going to do that. We are going to fight. Paused, looking at the phase appearing on his screen. Scared faces, determined faces, human faces. Our old ships are worthless. They think keeping them makes us weak, but they do not understand what these ships represent. Every ship in the museum was built by people who faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. Every name painted on these hulls belongs to someone who gave everything for the people they loved. We are not fighting with antiques. We are fighting with the collective courage of everyone who came before us. Bay doors began to open. Stars appeared beyond them, and among the stars, the lights of any ships. Dock all vessels. Form up on the Valor. It is time to show them what human wrecks can do. By one, the museum ships began to move. Their engines glowed with power. Their weapons powered up with sounds that had not been heard in decades. They flew out into the darks like ghosts returning from history. Battle for Earth was about to change. So the museum ships almost immediately. His tactical displays highlighted them as they emerged from the station and formed into something resembling a battle formation. He studied their silhouette with the cold interest of a collector examining insects. Manner, his tactical officer reported, the human museum vessels are approaching our fleet, 12 ships total. Configuration suggests they intend to engage. The sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a cough of disbelief. They are serious. They actually intend to fight us with those things. It appears so, Commander. Delightful, leaned back in his command chair and gestured casually at the main. Let them come. Order the 7th Wing to intercept and destroy them. This should provide entertainment while we finish off their real fleet. Warships broke formation and moved to meet the museum fleet. Each one was sleek and modern, covered in weapon arrays that pulsed with contained energy. They moved with perfect coordination, their computers linking them into a single fighting organism. Against them came 12 old ships that looked like they belonged in a history book. Marsh watched the approach from the bridge of the HFY. The old destroyer shook beneath his feet as her engine pushed harder than they had in years. Alarms were already sounding in 3 different sections, warning of systems that were not designed for that kind of stress. He ignored them all. Ships entering weapons range in 2 minutes, Helen reported from her station. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Ships hold formation until my command. Let them fire first. Voice came over the fleet channel, rough with age but sharp with experience. Captain, permit him to speak freely. Go ahead, Pete. Young folks might not know that, but there's a reason our ships were built the way they were. We expected to get hit. We expected to take damage. Every ship in this fleet has redundant systems, power, emergency protocols. The aliens think their fancy weapons will tear us apart. They are going to be surprised. He smiled despite everything. That is what I am counting on. All ships prepare to receive fire. Do not break formation. Trust your armor. Trust your ships. Open fire at maximum range. Beams of brilliant energy lance across the void, striking the museum fleet with devastating precision. The Val shuddered as 3 beams hit her forward hull. Alarm screamed. Damage reports flooded in, but the ship kept flying. The command ship watched the battle with growing confusion. His weapons were hitting. His targeting was perfect, but the human ships were not dying. Port, why are those Vales still operational? Tactical officers studied the day with obvious confusion. Their hulls are absorbing the damage, Commander. The armor plating is extraordinarily thick. Our energy weapons are dissipating against it instead of penetrating. Increased power, concentrate fire. Ships adjusted their attack. More beams struck the museum fleet. The old ships glowed with absorbed energy, their hulls turning red in places. But they did not break. They did not explode. They kept coming. Felt the valor growing around him. The ship was taking terrible punishment, but she was built in an era when shields were unreliable and armor was the only defense. Her designers had wrapped her in layers of metal specifically because they expected her to be shot. Turn fire, all ships weapons free. Museum fleet opened up with everything they had. The Valor's main guns were kinetic weapons that fired physical shells at incredible speed. They were primitive by modern standards, simple metal projectiles instead of energy beams, but they had one advantage that they had not anticipated. Shell punched straight through shield. Alien shields were designed to deflect energy weapons. They were sophisticated barriers that analyzed incoming fire and adjusted to counter it. But they had no idea what to do with a chunk of metal moving at a fraction of. The shells passed through the shields like they were not there and tore into the hulls beneath. Cruiser exploded as 3 shells from the rip through its reactor section. Another ship lost its engine array and began spinning out of control. A third took a direct hit to its bridge and went dark. Stood up from his chair, unable to believe what he was seeing. What is happening? How are those entities destroying my ships? The tactical officer was frantically analyzing the battle data. Commander, their weapons are kinetic, physical projectiles. Our shields are not designed to stop solid matter at those velocities, and their targeting systems are not networked. We cannot hack them. We cannot jam them. They are operating on completely isolated analog systems. That is impossible. No modern navy uses analog systems. These are not modern ships, Commander. They are relics, and apparently relics fight differently. The Valor was performing miracles in the engine room. The ship had taken 7 direct hits and half her systems were damaged, but knew every inch of these old vessels. She had maintained them for years. She knew which systems could be bypassed, which backups could be activated, which problems could be ignored. Thrusters are offline, but I can route through the secondary manifold. Give me 30 seconds. Ship lurched as she made adjustments with her bare hands, physically moving cables and closing switches that had not been touched in decades. Modern ships would have shut down completely under this kind of damage. Their computers would have declared them too wounded to fight. But the Valor did not have smart computers. She had, and was smarter than any computer ever built. And push the advantage. All ships press forward. Do not let them regroup. Museum fleet surged ahead, firing constantly. Their old guns roared with sounds that had not been heard in living memory. Shell after shell crossed the void and found targets. The 7th wing was falling apart, losing ships faster than they could understand what was happening. Admiral Grace Holland watched from the Sentinel platform with tears forming in her eyes. The impossible was happening. 12 museum ships were doing what her entire modern fleet could not. They were winning. Surviving defense ships form up behind the museum fleet, support their advance, target any vessel showing damage. Main ships moved to follow the old vessels, adding their fire to the assault. The line began to bubble. Ships that had seemed invincible minutes ago were now retreating in confusion. Their tactical computers could not adapt to an enemy that did not follow any modern doctrine. His fist against his command console. This was not possible. This was not how wars were fought. You did not lose to museum pieces and old men. You did not fall to technology that belonged in a history lesson. Ships focused fire on the largest human vessel, the one they called Destroy It Now. Vying ships turned their attention to the old battleship. Amy saw the enemy concentrating and knew what was coming. Hands braced for heavy fire. Damage control teams stand ready. Disappeared behind a wall of energy beams. Every weapon that could reach her fired at once. The old battleship staggered under the assault. Armor plates tore away. Sections decompressed. Fires erupted in multiple compartments. She kept flying and she kept shooting. Gripped her command chair as the bridge shook around her. Main guns, return fire. Give them everything we have. The ancient weapons spoke with voices of thunder. Shells the size of small vehicles crossed the distance to the enemy fleet and struck with devastating force. 2 more ships died. Then a third. The battle had turned. The Relics were winning. Enough. The battle that should have been a simple extermination was turning into something else entirely. His 7th wing was shattered, reduced to burning wreckage drifting through space. And the human Relics were still coming, still firing, still refusing to die like they were supposed to. This foolishness rose from his command chair and pointed at the tactical display. I will handle it personally. All elite guard vessels form up on my flagship. We will crush these entities ourselves. Flagship, the Dominion's Wrath, was the largest ship in the fleet. She carried weapons that could crack plants and shields that had never been breached in 300 years of conquest. Around her formed 12 elite guard vessels, each one crewed by the finest warriors the Dominion had produced, intended to end the embarrassment with overwhelming force. Marsh saw the enemy flagship moving and felt his heart sink. The Wrath was massive, easily 5 times the size of the. Her weapons were already charting, glowing with power that made his sensors scream warnings. This was different from fighting the regular ships. This was fighting their best. Ships defend that formation. Prepare to receive the flagship. Voice came over the channel tight with concern. Captain, I do not think we can stop that thing. She is too big and too strong. Knew Pete was right. The museum fleet had survived this long because they had underestimated them. Was not going to make that mistake again. He was bringing everything he had. We do not have to stop her. We just have to slow her down long enough for Admiral Holland to regroup the defense fleet. That is a suicide mission, Captain. No, but if we do not do it, Earth falls anyway. The channel was silent for a moment. Then Pete spoke again and his voice was calm. Understood. It has been an honor serving with you again, Captain. The honor is mine, Pete. Minion's Wrath opened fire. The first volley was a nightmare of energy and destruction. The museum ship Resolute took a direct hit and broke apart. The Defiant lost her entire rear section and began tumbling. In seconds, 2 of the 12 were gone. We watched her tactical display and saw what was happening. The flagship was carving through their formation like a blade through paper. At this rate, the entire museum fleet would be destroyed in minutes. They needed to do something different. They needed to do something crazy. Marsh, this is Commander on the I have an idea. His voice came back immediately. I'm listening. Flagship shields are strong against energy weapons and apparently strong against kinetic weapons at range. But shields have limits. If something big enough hit them at close range with enough force, the shields would collapse under the impact. What are you suggesting, Commander? He looked around her bridge. Her crew was watching her, waiting for orders. They were museum workers, retired veterans, and students. None of them had signed up for this, but none of them were leaving. It was built for close combat. Her armor is the thickest in the fleet. If I bring her in at full speed and ram the flagship, I can take down their shields. Then your kinetic weapons will work. Channel was silent. Danny understood what Amy was really saying. A ramming attack at full speed would destroy them. There was no version of the plan where Amy and her crew survived. Commander, I cannot ask you to do that. We're not asking, I'm offering. This is what that was built for. This is what I studied all my life. Let me do this, Captain. Let me make history instead of just teaching it. Closed his eyes. He thought about all the people who had served on these ships over the decades, all the sacrifices that had been made, all the battles that had been fought. Amy was right. This was what these ships were for. This was why they existed. At speed, Commander, we will finish what you start. Turned to her crew. You all heard that. Anyone who wants to leave, the escape pods are functional. I will not think less of anyone who goes. But he moved. A young engineering student named cleared his throat. Commander, I did not come here to run away. If the ship is going to make history, I want to be part of it. Nodded. Amy felt tears forming but forced them back. There would be time for emotions later, or there would not. Either way, she had a job to do. Hands, divert all power to engines and forward armor. Shut down everything else. Life support, weapons, sensors, everything. I want every ounce of energy the ship is pushing us forward. Light dimmed as Sit went offline. The groaned as her old reactors pushed harder than they had in decades. She began accelerating toward the Dominion's wrath, building speed with every second. The battleship clung and laughed. One ship, they are sending one ship against me, destroyed. Weapons focused on the beam struck her hull and tore away armor plates. Missiles exploded against her sides. The old battleship was being ripped apart piece by piece, but she kept coming. Her speed was increasing despite the damage. She was aimed directly at the flagship center. Enter the human vessel is not slowing down. Collision course confirmed. Laughter died. What? They are going to ram us. Possible. That is primitive. That is insane. That is what they are doing. This bridge, Amy watched the flagship growing larger on her single remaining screen. The ship was shaking so violently she could barely stay in her chair. Fires burned in multiple sections. The hull was failing. They had maybe 30 seconds left. When a channel to the entire fleet, to Earth, to anyone who was listening. Commander Amy of the, we were told our ships were relics. We were told our past was a weakness. But the people who built the ship knew something they do not understand. They knew that some things are worth dying for. They knew that courage does not become obsolete. They built the ship to protect Earth, and that mission never expired. The Minion's wrath tried to evade, but she was too large and the was too fast. The old battleship struck the flagship shields at maximum velocity. The impact was visible from Earth, a flash of light that momentarily the sun. Shields collapsed. They were not designed to handle 500,000 tons of armor-plated battleship hitting them at a significant fraction of. The plowed through the barrier and struck the flagship's hull directly. Both ships crumbled together in a catastrophic embrace. Remaining ammunition detonated inside the wound she had torn. The explosion ripped through the Dominion's wrath, destroying her reactor, her weapons, her bridge. Had exactly 2 seconds to understand what was happening before his flagship died around him. Mar watched the explosion from the Val bridge. Tears streamed down his face, but his voice was steady when he spoke. Ships, the flagship is down. Their shields are gone. Attack now. Make their sacrifice mean something. 5 museum ships surged forward, their ancient weapons blazing. Behind them, Admiral Han's defense fleet joined the assault. The elite guard, suddenly without their leader and their strongest ship, began to fall apart. Battle was not over, but the tide had turned forever. The fleet lasted 11 more minutes after the Dominion's wrath exploded. Without their flagship, without their elite guard, the remaining ships fell in chaos. Their tactical networks had been built around centralized command. When that command vanished, they became individual vessels fighting alone against an enemy that was suddenly everywhere. Marsh led the museum fleet through the heart of the enemy formation. The old ships were battered and broken, trailing debris in the atmosphere, but they kept flaring. Pete's guns on the Val tore apart 3 more cruisers, or formed impossible repairs on systems that should have failed hours ago. Helen Park's improvised software kept the targeting computers running despite damage that would have crashed any modern system. Grace Han brought her surviving defense ships into the battle with renewed fury. Her crews had watched the museum fleet do the impossible. They had seen the die so they could live. They fought now with a desperate energy that they could not match. By one, the enemy ships fell. Some exploded under concentrated fire. Others tried to flee and were hunted down. A few surrendered, their captain broadcasting pleas for mercy that the humans granted despite everything. By the time the last vessel vanished into hyperspace, the battle was over. Earth had survived. This was terrible. Of the 12 museum ships that had launched, only 5 remained. The Valor was still flying, though Dane doubted she would ever fly again after this day. The others were hulks drifting in orbit, their crews evacuating to rescue shuttles. Of the humans who had crewed those ancient vessels, over 600 had died. Amy and everyone aboard them were gone, their sacrifice written in the burning wreckage that had once been the flagship. Sat in his command chair as the Valor limped toward the Sentinel platform. The battle adrenaline was fatting, leaving behind exhaustion so deep he could barely keep his eyes open. His ship groaned around him, metal settling and systems failing. She had given everything she had. They all had. Appeared on the bridge, moving slowly and favoring his bad leg more than usual. His face was covered in soot, and his hands were bandaged from burns he had gotten when his console exploded. But he was smiling. We did it, Captain. We actually did it. Not, we did, though I'm not sure how. How? Pete sat down heavily in a chair that had not been occupied in 30 years. We did it because those aliens made a mistake. They thought old meant weak. They thought history meant nothing, but we knew better. We knew these ships were not just metal and wire. They were everything humanity ever was. All our stubbornness, all our courage, all our refusal to give up even when giving up made sense. It sounds like something Amy would have said. Did say it? Years ago during one of her tour. I was visiting the museum and heard her talk about that. She said that ship was built by people who expected to lose but fought anyway. She said that was what made humanity special. Pete's voice caught. I guess she proved herself right. Our dock at the Sentinel platform 2 hours later. Danny was the last one to leave the ship. He stood in the airlock and looked back at the bridge one final time. The lights were dimming as systems shut down. The old destroyer was finally going to rest. Thank you, he whispered. You did good. Celebration on Earth lasted for days. People danced in the streets and wept with relief. The news networks played footage of the battle over and over, focusing on the moment when the museum fleet emerged from their station. They called it the miracle of the relics. They called the museum crews heroes. They called Amy a legend. A week after the battle, Admiral Grey Holland visited Dane Marsh at the museum station. The surviving ships had been towed back to their berths, and crews were already beginning repairs. Dane was standing in front of the Valor, looking at the scars on her hull. Marsh, Holland saluted formally. I never got to thank you properly. You saved Earth, you and your crews and those impossible old ships. In return the salute. We did what anyone would have done, Admiral. We used what we had. You did more than that. You proved something that I think everyone needed to see. Holland looked at the Valor, then at the empty berth where they used to rest. You proved that our past is not dead weight, it is strength. All those years we spent preserving these ships, keeping them functional, teaching people about them. It mattered. It made a difference. He smiled sadly. Amy understood that better than anyone. She always said history was not about looking backward. It was about carrying forward everything good that came before. Oriole was established in this berth. It contained pieces of wreckage recovered from the battle, along with photographs and personal items from every crew member who had died. Amy's name was engraved at the top, followed by the words she had spoken in her final transmission. Visitors came from all over Earth to see it, to pay respects, to understand what had happened. Vying museum ship became the most visited exhibits in human space. People traveled for weeks just to stand beside the Valor and touch her hull. Children grew up hearing stories about Pete and Helm Park. The names of the dead were taught in schools alongside the names of every hero who had ever defended humanity. Months after the battle, a diplomatic delegation arrived from a neighboring star system. They had heard about what happened. Word had spread through the galaxy about the species that had defeated the with antique warships. Among the delegates was Observer, sent to negotiate peace terms. He was asked to guide the delegation through the museum. He walked them past ship after ship, explaining the history of each one. When they reached the Valor, the delegate stopped and stared at the old destroyer in silence. This is the ship that led your fleet, the delegate said quietly. It was not a question. Yes, she's over 100 years old. She was built during a war that most people have forgotten. But you kept her, you maintained her, you made sure she could still fight. We did. The delegate was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, almost respectful. Edgar believed your attachment to old things was a weakness. He believed that a species who could not let go of the past could never embrace the future. He was wrong. He looked at the Val, at her scars and her patched armor and her guns that had spoken thunder against impossible odds. Do not keep these ships because we are weak. We keep them because they remind us who we are. Every ship here represents a moment when humanity faced destruction and chose to fight. Every name on these hulls belongs to someone who gave everything for the people they loved. That is not weakness. That is strength. It nodded slowly. I think I understand now. Your species does not discard its past because your past is still fighting for you. Your ancestors built these ships, and in some way, your ancestors still crew them. He smiled. Something like that. We have a saying on Earth, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. But we have another saying too, those who remember history can repeat its victories. Patted the Valor's hull gently, feeling the cold metal beneath his palm. Ships were not relics, they were promises. Promises that no matter how bad things got, humanity would keep fighting, and when the time came, we kept the promise. Galaxy learned a new lesson about humanity that day. They learned that humans did not throw away things that still had value. They learned that human courage did not rust or decay, and they learned that anyone foolish enough to mock human history would have to answer to it. Museum ships stood in their berths and proud, waiting for whatever came next. They had done their duty, and if they were ever needed again, they would answer the call. Because that was what they were built to do.